Hi guys, I made this video so that you could take a look at the linear assessment you did several weeks ago and think about how you did on it, but also think about what things you know now that you maybe didn't know when you took the assessment. You're going to need a clean sheet of notebook paper, and you should head it with your first and last name and the date. Today is the 8th, and then you should also make sure you write as the topic of the paper linear assessment reflection. Linear assessment reflection. Make sure that you're listening carefully to the video because I'm going to ask you some questions, and when I ask questions I want you to stop the video and I want you to answer the questions. You don't have to write down everything. The main thing you have to do is write down the answers to my questions. Alright, so this problem talks about Travis wanting to collect Slim Jims, and it says he's trying to get into the Guinness Book of Records for the largest ever collection of Slim Jims, and the chart shows how he's doing. So the first thing is, this is a really important point right here. And this is weeks, and this is Slim Jims. So my first question is, do you know what the math word is for this point? And do you know what that means in terms of the graph? So I want you to stop the video, and I want you to answer what is the math word for this point? And if you don't know the math word without looking it up, then right, I still don't know the math word for this. And make sure you show me an example of what it means in terms of the graph. Okay, the word you should have written is this is the y-intercept. And you should have explained that in terms of the graph, it means where the line that represents this relationship between weeks and Slim Jims is crossing or intercepting the y-axis. So it's 0, 15. This means to go over none and up 15. It also means, in terms of the situation, that even at the beginning he had 15 Slim Jims. So he had these stored up even before the week started, where he was actually trying to get into the Guinness Book of World Records. Okay, the question now asks you to graph the data, and so I want you to look at your graph. Now, it doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but I want you to look carefully and make sure you didn't make any mistakes with your numbering, because that's something I see a lot, is numbering mistakes. So it's okay if you went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 this way. It's also okay if you skipped lines like I did. But what wouldn't be okay is if you started the 1 right here. Or it wouldn't be okay if you started the 1 here, but then went 2 spaces and made a 2. Every number has to be equally spaced apart. So between the 0 and 1, there's 2 spaces. Between the 1 and 2, I have 2 spaces. Between the 2 and 3, I have 2 spaces. And even though I counted by very different numbers on the y-axis, I kept the same rule. Every number is the same distance apart. So between 0 and 10, there's 1 space. There's no number here, but the number that would be there is a 20. And between 10 and 20 is 1 space. Between 20 and 30 is 1 space. Between 30 and 40 is 1 space. Between 40 and 50, because they have to be equally spaced. I can count by whatever I want, but they have to be equally spaced. Would you stop the video now and answer the question, how did you do on numbering the x and the y-axis and labeling the x and y-axis? Did you remember to call this weeks? And did you remember to label this number of Slim Jims? Because numbering and labeling really is important on your graph. Answer the question now. Okay, the next question I want you to answer is, how did you do on plotting your points? I know some of you still have a little bit of troubles figuring out when you look at a graph how to put the points on the graph. So this number right here tells me to go over 3 on my x or week axis and then go up to 75. So I have to go over to 3 and then up to where 75 is. Well, on my graph, since I'm numbering by tens, it's going to be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and then 75 is going to be halfway in between. So there's 375. Would you pause for a minute and tell me how you're doing on being able to take points from a table like this and plot them on the graph? Are you fully confident that you can do it all the time with no help, or is that something you still need to work on? Answer the question now. Okay, the next question is asking you to write an equation that shows the relationship between the number of weeks, W, and the number of Slim Jims, S. The equation that you should have written is S represents the number of Slim Jims, is equal to 15 plus 20W. Or you could have written S is equal to 20W plus 15. So do you know how to get the constant rate of change from the graph? So 15 plus 20 is 35, 35, 45, 55, 55, 65, 75. The constant rate of change here is 20. The constant rate of change here is 1. And 20 divided by 1 is 20. That's my slope. That's my constant rate of change. It's also the coefficient. Do you know how to get this? And before you answer that question, would you know how to get it if this wasn't counting by ones? If I went 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and over here I counted by something else, then would you be able to find the slope by yourself? Or would you still need some help? So stop the video and tell me how you think you're doing on being able to find the constant rate of change from a table now, even a table that's more difficult than this one. Okay, and then the second part of the equation is putting in the y-intercept. Sometimes the y-intercept is 0, 0, and so you don't see this part. In this case, though, it's not 0, 0, it's 0, 15. So after I have my constant rate of change, I have to add in that y-intercept. So in the next part, I'd like you to answer the question, how did you do? Did you remember to add in the y-intercept, and did you put it in the right place? Because some people wrote 15w plus 20, and the 15 is the y-intercept. It should not have a variable next to it. It's the slope that has to have, or the coefficient that has to have a variable next to it. So how did you do on that part? And then also, did you remember to read the directions carefully and use the correct variables? And did you know where they went? So some people used x and y, but the question, the x is w and the y is s. So tell me about how you did with using the right variables and the y-intercept and having it in the correct place. Stop the video and answer the question now. Okay, now the question is saying write an equation, what is the slope of the equation? So I'm right here. Well, the slope is 20, and I know a lot of you didn't know the word slope the day that we took this test, but do you now? Do you now know what slope really is and how you can see it from 2 points, how you can see it in an equation, how you can find it from a table, and how you can find it from a graph? So tell me where you think you are with the word slope and being able to find it in the 4 ways. Stop the video and answer the question. Okay, this one is saying, what does the slope mean in terms of the situation? And so it's asking you, what does the 20 mean in terms of Travis's Slim Jim collection? Well, it means that Travis collects 20 Slim Jims every 1 week, or you could say Travis collects 20 Slim Jims per week. Stop the video and tell me how you did on telling me what it means in terms of his Slim Jims collection. Okay, we're going to jump to question 6 because we already know from the equation that the y-intercept is 15. How did you do with explaining what it means in terms of the situation, and how do you feel you are now? Do you know now when you see a y-intercept that it means at 0? So in this case, it means that Travis had 15 Slim Jims at 0 weeks. How are you doing with the being able to explain the y-intercept in terms of a situation and knowing now that it means at 0? Are you remembering to put that in every time? Answer the question. Okay, and these last two questions are saying use the equation to show how many Slim Jims Travis will have after 10 weeks. So if I'm going to find how many Slim Jims, then I'm trying to find S, because S stands for Slim Jims, and I have to put the weeks, 10, into the W spot in the equation. So 20 times 10 is 200, plus 15 gives me 215. I want to know two things on this one. I want to know, did you know where to put the 10 in the equation? And do you know once you put it in, how to use the equation to get the number 215? And our last question asks us to use the equation again to show how many weeks it will take Travis to get 255 Slim Jims. So this time you're going to answer several questions. First, did you know that the 255 goes over here in the S spot, Slim Jims, which would be the Y spot if we were using Y equals mx plus b? And then did you know how that you had to subtract 15 on both sides? Are you showing this work? Did you realize then you have to divide by 20 on both sides? Are you showing that work so that the weeks equals 12? So I want to know, how are you at solving equations? Could I give you a two-step equation right now and you can solve it? And if you tell me that you're good at it, prove it. Make up an equation that's two-step and solve it for me. And I also want to know, how are you with knowing where to put the numbers when I give you a sentence like this 7 and 8 so that you can use the equation to answer the question? Do you know where those numbers go? That's your last question, so when you're done answering that question, you're done with this self-reflection. Thanks, you guys.